Imagine if you could easily find solutions to make your region or city smarter, greener, better connected, more social, and closer to citizens. The Interreg Europe Policy Learning Platform can help you access knowledge about the latest policy trends, discover expert-validated good practices from all over Europe, find solutions in our peer review, get tailored support from our expert team. We can connect you with the right people and organizations. Together, we will find ways to solve your region's or city's challenges. Start your policy learning journey today.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Interreg Europe Policy Learning Platform online workshop on forest ecosystems. My name is Magda Michalikova, and I'm a thematic expert on Greener Europe at the Interreg Europe Policy Learning Platform. I would also like to welcome my expert colleagues, Astrid Severin, who is also a thematic expert on Greener Europe, and Lotte van Meel from our communications team, who is making this all work today. So before we start with our interesting program, I would like to share some housekeeping rules. First of all, this event is recorded, so you will be able to find the recording online after the event is over, along with all of today's presentations. During the workshop, we will share some useful information and links in the chat. And we also encourage you to take the opportunity to post your questions there as well. At the end of the event, we will share a short survey in the chat as well, where you can give us feedback, which really helps us to improve and make our events better and better. To start with, we've prepared these two polls to get to know you a little bit as well. And I would like to ask Lotte to launch these polls now.
Yeah, Magda, I'm trying to launch them, but there seems to be an issue. Maybe we can rather ask them in the chat.
Okay, yeah, no problem. So we'll ask them in the chat, and we have two questions, two polls. First one is asking what type of organization you are coming from. So you can be a local, regional, or national authority. Maybe you're coming from forest management or water management company. Maybe you're from private organization or consultancy, from an NGO, a fund, academia, or some other type. So please let us know. Let us know in the chat. We will see if maybe we can launch the polls in the meantime. And if not, you can just post your answers there so that we see a little bit what kind of mix of people we have here today. And the second question, the second poll is about your main interests to attend this workshop. So it might be you're interested in sustainable forest management, in water and forest ecosystems, in biodiversity in general, or in nature-based solutions. Or maybe you're interested in all of these. So again, please let us know. And let's see. Yes, so we have quite a lot of public institutions, local and regional authorities. Some people coming from academia, Kostas coming from the NGO, Sonia from a consultancy, somebody from forest management, but I would say mostly we have public institution, regional and local, and academia would be the main. But let's see, we do have quite a nice mix, it seems. So that should be quite interesting for you to hear from our speakers today. And maybe you can, we can also, Lotte, share the second poll in the chat, and we can have people answering in the meantime. And I will go to the presentation in the meantime, and I will get back to your answers afterwards. So this this workshop today is organized by Interreg Europe, specifically by the Policy Learning Platform. In Interreg Europe, we have two main actions. One action is focused on projects. So a lot of you might be coming from Interreg Europe projects, so that's something you know quite well. And the other pillar is the Policy Learning Platform. And there we are really focusing on exploiting the achievements of Interreg Europe projects and at peer learning and sharing of the good practices that were identified through Interreg Europe projects, but also other good practices across Europe. And we are trying to facilitate this exchange between regions. So we can go to the next slide. And apart from these online and on-site events that we do, and some written publications as well that we do, like policy briefs, stories, or news, we offer expert support. And this expert support is can be done through matchmakings or peer reviews. We already have quite a nice history of these matchmaking and peer reviews, and there is an opportunity for you to also learn a little bit more about this, and for example, to have a peer review on forest ecosystems, on forest management plans, and topics like that. So if you're interested, if you want to learn more, you can always reach out to me and Astrid. These are the peer reviews are 2-day events where we gather 4 to 5 experts on the topics, peers from Europe, and we together discuss and develop solutions for your region. So we can go to the next slide. So when we look at the agenda for today, we are starting with a first session on sustainable forests management. We will have a keynote presentation from Bernhard Wolfslehner. Maybe Bernhard, you can turn on your camera and show yourself to our participants. Bernhard is coming from the European Forestry Institute and from Forest Europe, and he will talk about guidelines for sustainable forest management. And then after the keynote speech, we will hear 2 good practices. One will be on forest management plans in Slovenia by Marjana Westergren, and one will be about urban forestation plan by Carlotta Bonvicini from Municipality of Reggio, Emilia in Italy. We will then have a short networking break. And we will move to our second session, which will be on ecosystem services of forests. Here we will hear from David Ellison, who will talk about precipitation recycling and cooling power of forests. And after his very interesting keynote presentation, we will have 2 examples, one on forests for water in Catalonia from Teresa Baiges from Spain, and the other on regional forest program in Central Finland by Matti Virkkunen from the Finnish Forest Center. After that, we will have a little plenary session with conclusions from the two panels. And we will have a closing keynote presentation delivered by Marco Onida from the European Commission, who will tell us a little bit about the new EU forest strategy for 2030. We just wanted to share very briefly some of the resources from the policy learning platform that might be interesting for you. One is the policy brief on forest ecosystems. I believe Lotte will share a link in the chat. And here you can learn a little bit more about the European policy context, looking at how our forests mentioned in the EU biodiversity strategy, the new EU forest strategy, or the nature restoration law. You can learn about European financial support that you can reach to. And we have very interesting good practices and policy improvements for several Interreg Europe projects. We also have other policy briefs on the topics of nature and biodiversity, on rivers and wetlands, on preserving and restoring biodiversity, on coastal regions, and on nature-based solutions for climate adaptation where we look specifically on wetlands, grasslands, and peatlands. We also have two stories. One very recent on restoring ecological diversity of forests, and second one on planting trees the right way. So these might be interesting for you as well. And now looking at your answers in the chat, we have it looks like you're interested in all the topics that will be covered today. So that's great to hear. And I think with that, we can go to our first session. So it is my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker, Mr. Bernhard Wolfslehner from the European Forestry Institute and Forest Europe, who will open our first session on sustainable forest management with his keynote presentation. So a warm welcome to you. And we are very happy to have you here with us today. And the floor is yours, Bernhard.
Thank you, Magda. Good afternoon also from my side. And thanks for the invitation to speak to you. I think what I decided to do is to give a short umbrella about sustainable forest management in Europe. So I think I will not go into details of particular guidelines, but just that we have a common ground and also for our discussions. And I think this fits quite nicely since being here with Interreg and so many regional representatives. So we, of course, have to start with the notion that European forests are a story of diversity. So this is entirely clear, and it's some of the things that on European level we always struggle is how to fit things together without the one-size-fits-all approach, but also have a sort of common framework that is really capable of dealing with the issue of forest management for the future all across Europe with all this diversity that you can see here in this picture. Also, we have to say that the concept of sustainable forest management has evolved over time. So when it started, it was a concept to safeguard the provision of timber, more or less. Yeah? So this was the background when we started nowadays. And I think also one of the focus of this afternoon will be also the provision of ecosystem services by forests, and also how this can be implemented within the framework of European policy instruments. So I think it's very important also during our discussions then to highlight in which avenues, which pathways are here really feasible to further develop this. In the European and pan-European understanding, we have now more than 30 years of experience on sustainable forest management, as I said, so this is the more modern understanding compared to the old story of 300 years of sustainable forest management, which of course has a different background. And with this process, it's the Forest Europe process. In particular, this has created the main reference for sustainable forest management in Europe. So I think most of you dealing with forests must have encountered on the one or other way some aspects of this pan-European SFM process, because it helped quite a lot to define what this sustainable forest management means for Europe. And it's really a voluntary process, a political process, but basically all European countries and the European Union are among the signatories. So it's a very widely accepted approach that has been negotiated now in 8 conferences, with the next one in Bonn in Germany next year. So to move further ahead with the concept of SFM. But moving a little bit away, of course, from the political side, there have been significant outcomes. So most importantly, of course, the criterion indicators for sustainable forest management. I will come back to those, which can be both a political but also a very practical tool and to monitor and assess sustainable forest management. Then also issues that are relevant for the work that you are doing, national forest programs, stakeholder involvement, but also the transfer from science to policy and science to practice, including those guidelines that also have been promised. So there are some guidelines, but the uptake is maybe one of the more difficult things, because this always means breaking down some general rules towards something very specific. So something I'm really eager also to hear your opinions on that. And overall, of course, the main paradigm is that SFM is a balancing approach. So balancing social, ecological, and economic demands without, prioritizing one over the other. We can see that, of course, this development of sustainable forest management led to different activities. So I talked already about different political developments all over the world. So very regional in this aspect means that Europe is a region in this, or North America is a region. But then also there were approaches to go down to the forest management unit level. So you can see the arrow here where I indicate it's not always 100% clear how this works. How can you go from a political level towards the forest unit level? Very difficult question, and not always trivial to solve. And then on the other hand, of course, there has been the development of market-based initiatives like certification, which has basically the same reference, but comes from a different direction. So we know this, and results are sometimes similar, but sometimes have a very different motivation behind it. So very, very important also to keep in mind this issue. Briefly, also as an input for discussion, so that, of course, such a process has strengths and weaknesses. After quite some decades, we can sort of learn also from that in your implementation of your work then on more regional level. And what we found is that the most important thing is, of course, to find a common language between different groups, between different stakeholder groups, also have a clear terminology, for example, for monitoring and other common activities, how to communicate with stakeholder groups, and also being a central reference. A central reference is always important, where people know where they're coming from and where they can move towards. So also over 30 years, then the communication and reporting of information on forests allows for wider timelines and trends. So this is quite a merit as such, and we will come back to this. Then on the other hand, of course, I mean, we also have to be self-critical that sometimes the conception behind how these different elements work together is not always clear. So when I say that it's a balancing approach between the different pillars, sometimes this interaction between these elements are not really looked upon, while we really can see there's a lot of dynamics and complexity behind it. Also, we see that the harmonization of monitoring is still challenging. So one of the elements that also Marco Onida will then report afterwards with the presentation on the EU forest strategy. And what SFM, of course, is somehow in the scrutiny is that sometimes it's difficult to assess the progress. So to say, is it good or is it bad? Is it going in the right direction or not overall? And of course, this is a shortcoming that this is quite sensitive, of course, when this seems to be like a very central question. And after also the forest sector so far tended to be very often in their own silos. So it's forestry experts speaking to forestry experts, all know each other, but I think it's very important to reach outside and also create a broader understanding of common objectives, but also of conflicting issues. Then, of course, we have the sort of external factors. So climate change, of course, is now a big driver in all aspects of forest management as such. So this is very often sort of being on top of everything else, and a very strong element in all forest-related policies at the moment. On top of that, of course, we have a more heated debate on biodiversity protection, which is also one of these very central goals now in the wake of the climate of the Biodiversity Convention. And of course, these different objectives on forests. So biodiversity, how to use our resources in a green economy. How can we adapt to climate change? This, of course, leads very often to controversies about the best future use of forests. This can be both on a European level, but also on a very regional and local level. So how do we use our forests? What about the best use of resources? And best always means that there are interests behind it. And this is quite normal and nothing to worry about. There are different interests, but it needs mechanisms to bargain those interests. So we have complex new challenges right now. So when we started thinking about forests and restoring them back then, it was basically the use of forest and forest resources. Then, of course, we had the idea of ecosystem service and a broader understanding coming up, where there was the issue to protect. Also, then climate change taught us in a rather brutal way, okay, now we really have to adapt. It's not just a word that we can push alongside, but forests need adaptation to fulfill all these ecosystem services. And also now we're moving towards restoring again. So also one of the important policies of the European Union is this restoration law, where we also have to see how we can bring back some of these old lost forest ecosystems. So to come to an end, we have more ahead. So the challenge is not over, to the contrary, but it's, I think there's no reason for despair. But of course, we have to face issues on different levels. So on the one hand, the need for operational tools is ever emerging. So this is also a message to forest practitioners out there. So we have a lot of technology right now ongoing. And I think it's time to really use technologies or develop technologies that help us also in the monitoring, communication, and knowledge handling. A lot of potential ongoing there. As I said, so I see a potential forthcoming also in the synergies among political and technical processes, so that they're not discussing something completely different upon the same story. But this has somehow brought together, as well as the levels, different spatial levels, of course. As I said, so the assessment of progress is important, and the moderation of goal conflicts, I think we cannot do without it. This is one of the issues that also relates from the very, inner region stakeholder engagement and conflict moderation towards really also seeing the synergies and trade-offs between policy objectives. And then, of course, when we look at the challenges in our forests, we see that, of course, prognosis and prevention will be much more in the focus, because we're talking about risks, increasing risks in forest management, and also the need for adaptation. So this is something where we have to move a little bit beyond our usual boundaries of reliance. So it will be new ground, and so this really means new instruments also to have a closer look on how we can proceed here. So this was just a starting point then for further discussion, and also then giving the floor to other speakers. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Bernhard. Excellent presentation. Thank you for providing us with a little bit of the history and the concept, but also for the more holistic questions on how do we use our forest and how do we manage all the different needs and expectations that we have. You've mentioned stakeholder engagement several times as quite an important part of that. and we will hear some good examples in the following presentations on that, I think. Please, if you have any questions for Bernhard, put them in the chat. I can perhaps start. You've mentioned, well, when we think about forests, it can be sometimes difficult to monitor the changes because they might be happening sort of more long-term, from a more long-term perspective. And you've also talked about monitoring a little bit in your presentation. So how would you say we can best monitor the health of a forest ecosystem over time?
Yeah, I think monitoring was one of the most debated forest topic in the past 2-3 years, also culminating now in this new regulation on forest monitoring. I guess Marco will talk about that. So I think out of all our discussions, workshops and activities that we had, it was clear that there are a lot of parameters or indicators that can be monitored with proven criterion indicators, which don't change so often. But of course, there are many aspects, and we just have to think at the example of disturbances. When we had these huge disturbances, then there it's not enough to say, okay, 5 years later that we had some disturbances. So we need it just on time. So we need both. So the more long-term perspectives on aspects that are not so sort of changing all the time, but also we need more up-to-date information, for example, on the size of disturbances. Of course, we would like to know it already tomorrow, what happened yesterday. And I think finding this balance is also, it's a political question, but it's of course also, as I said, a technological question, which is now currently in the further development.
Thank you. So do we have any questions from the audience, from the other speakers, perhaps as well? And don't be shy, take the opportunity to ask.
No, I don't see anything in the chat, but maybe I can ask you also something, Bernhard. We have you've talked about the difficulties of uptake. So from science to policy, from science to practice, I guess. So what do you see are the main barriers? Is it financial, or is it awareness, or where do you see the main barriers for this uptake?
It's not only barriers. I mean, it's a huge job. For me, I think one of the big challenges to have a consistent understanding across all these different levels, and basically bring down to the ground or to the forest management unit level what has been sort of decided or developed on policy level. In between is sort of this interface of science, of interpretation also. But then it's a lot of people with different backgrounds. And as I said, so maybe people would say it was easier in former times because it was the forestry group basically doing everything and deciding. This is not the case anymore. So there's huge public pressure. There's also interest in forests from different angles right now, and moderating this is the most difficult thing compared to having a very homogeneous group of decision makers. So that's not trivial, as I said.
Would you say there is enough awareness also at policy level about the risks and the difficulties that we have in forests with regard, for example, to climate adaptation and so on? My question is coming from another event about water, where I've learned that many of the politicians are not so well aware of the risks that are actually related now, for example, to flooding and so on. Because I think the current systems are still quite well working. Do you see something similar also for forests?
You know, the problem is always that if something happens, then everybody is aware of this, but of course only one aspect, and this is not a very sort of anticipatory approach. So if there's a big disaster, then of course everybody has always known that everything, or all of it is wrong. So I think the deeper understanding, this is the issue. It's not so much only the awareness, because the awareness could be pretty much triggered by media coverage. So a good story sometimes pops up. A catastrophic story takes everything for a couple of weeks. And if a disaster is a sort of initial stone to look a little bit deeper, get a clearer understanding, then it's of course of help. But for this, it needs a broader discussion. Yeah, so it's not just the headline is not enough. Let's keep it like this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bernhard. We also have one question from Marjana. How difficult or easy is it to reconcile different management practices across Europe, considering also different cultures and environments?
Yeah, of course, this is a very complex question. I tried to make it easy. It doesn't have to be all the same all over Europe. I think what's important to find common principles. This is important. And what always helps is this learning of similar problems. Because just think of having forest fires in the south and having bark beetles somewhere in Central Europe, then of course the measures are not the same. But a major part of the problem might be the same. So how to solve it, how to better prevent in the future, how to bring in people, how to raise awareness, how to communicate. So there are certain aspects that this learning, cross-regional learning, this helps a lot. So this is my experience. And then it doesn't have to be 100% the same. That's impossible.
Great. Thank you very much. So we also have questions from Laura, but maybe we'll leave that and answer that afterwards.
Or I can try to answer in the chat.
Yeah, you can also do that.
Mm-hmm.
And now we would like to launch another poll. So how we will do that is that we will ask you to go to Slido. And my colleague will, well, she's just sharing the screen now. So you can use the QR code or you can use the link that's in the chat. And the question is, does your region or organization have a sustainable forest management strategy? So please go ahead and vote. So I can see that you're still voting. So far, most of you do have a sustainable forest management strategy, but there's a lot of you that don't know as well. So maybe that's something to improve. Maybe a lack of public participation or stakeholder engagement in your region. Yeah, so yeah, I think that's that. Very interesting to see. And now I would like to invite our next speaker. So Marjana, we will hear from Marjana Westergren from the Slovenian Forestry Institute, and she will speak about the forest management plans in Slovenia. So Marjana, please share your presentations.
Yes.
The floor is yours.
Coming up. Okay, do you see it? Yes. Okay. Hello in my name as well. As said, I'm Marjana Westergren and I work at the Slovenian Forestry Institute. And I have the pleasure to tell you a little bit about the forests in Slovenia and the management planning that underpins the state of the forests we have. I will also tell you a little bit about how the Interreg Europe project BIOGOV contributed to improvement of the process of forest management planning. A little bit of a background. Forests in Slovenia cover 58% of the territory, and almost half of these forests are actually Natura 2000 sites. So in one word, we have a lot of forest. And forest management in Slovenia follows 3 principles that are embedded in our legislation, and you have heard a little bit about those in the previous presentation. So these are sustainability, multifunctionality, and close to nature forest management. Now they have a very, very long tradition in our country, actually since the beginning of the 20th century. And they are very important for the way we manage our forests, and they are also crucial in the way how we conserve biodiversity. Now, with these 3 principles, we are also following or implementing the main pillars of the European green legislation. So the biodiversity conservation, the climate change mitigation and adaptation, and the green circular economy. Now, what is also very important is that the forest management planning is mandatory for all public and all private forests. And this is especially important because 3/4 of forests in Slovenia are privately owned. Actually, every fifth Slovenian is a forest owner. And the public body called Slovenia Forest Service is responsible for preparing all these management plans. And once the management plans are approved by the government, they become binding in terms of their restrictions. Now, forest management planning is hierarchical, and we have 3 levels of management plans. On the top are regional forest management plans, which are really strategic, and they provide core principles for managing forests, but they also include the distribution and management of all forest functions. Now, in Slovenia, we don't talk about ecosystem services, but rather we talk about forest functions, and we have 14 of them that are listed in our law on forests. Under those plans, the regional plans, we have forest management plans for forest management units. We have 231 of those, and they go more into the detail already, but they are still somewhat strategic. And then on the bottom level, we have silvicultural plans, and they tackle forest management very concretely from, for example, from the timing and spatial distribution of cutting and regeneration to tending measures, protection works, and the detailed management of forest functions. Now, all these plans are renewed every 10 years. With the regional plans, they are renewed, all 14 of them are renewed simultaneously, while the other 2 levels, 1/10 of the plans is renewed every year, but they still have a validity of 10 years. And biodiversity and nature conservation are already integrated into forest management plans through our legislation. But somehow the measures to implement these functions the finances are limited. And this brings a bit of a friction between the economic and the biodiversity conservation goals or these functions. And the forest planners really must tackle these frictions and take into account the conflicting interests when they are preparing the forest management plans. So here, dialogue between the stakeholders is really becoming increasingly important. And what you see, and I'm sorry that it's mostly in Slovenian, you see a scheme for the preparation of the forest management plans on the regional level. And you can see where the stakeholders can interact in the process during the development of the plans. And their input is really the most important during the drafting process, because then it's also the easiest to discuss and include their comments and their wishes into the forest management plans. Now, during the last round of forest management plan preparation that was happening in year 2021, there were several participatory workshops and surveys that were organized, and the BIOGOV project mainly helped to improve the capacity of the Slovenia Forest Service to conduct a dialogue with the stakeholders and to use tools primarily in digital environment, because all the thing was happening during the COVID pandemic. And at the same time, the Slovenia Forest Service really wanted to have a better stakeholder involvement in the process, precisely because they were aware of the multitude of views and the importance of incorporating them already in the beginning in the planning. Now, the table lists all the different workshops that we had, but also the number of stakeholders or the participants in these workshops. And the numbers may seem very small to you, but Slovenia is a small country. But I can tell you that they are a huge improvement from what has happened in the previous round of forest management plan preparations. And actually, I'm a little bit lucky that I live in a country where we have protected biodiversity for decades already. And the biodiversity is high if you look at a little bit at the numbers on this slide. But as everywhere else, the biodiversity is endangered, and here a respectful dialogue may help. And the results of this dialogue have been now incorporated in the 10-year management plans, and hopefully that has improved the understanding and will improve the understanding on one side between the biodiversity conservation and the understanding on how sustainable, multifunctional and close to nature forest management can protect biodiversity. And coming back to monitoring, this is really important, because biodiversity is something that changes over longer periods of time, and we will not know if incorporating better the wishes of stakeholders had a positive effect on the biodiversity. So here the monitoring is really important. And in Slovenia, the Public Forest Service carries out this monitoring, also following the criteria and indicators for the sustainable forest management from the Forest Europe process. And I think that with that, I'm at the end of my presentation, and I will end it with a photo from Natura 2000 forest in Slovenia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marjana. I really like the photo. I really like the choice of your background as well.
Thank you.
Very thematic. It's great to see the approach that Slovenia has taken to manage forests, and it's great to see how embedded sustainability and protection of biodiversity is in your planning, and has been for such a long time. That was very impressive to me. Yeah, also the way how you engage stakeholders, what you have shared with us, I think that's very important, and is truly inspirational and interesting for our audience today. I wonder if the high number of private ownership has to do with the way how you manage this, and how you are involving stakeholders in the process.
I actually think it's a result of the denationalization process. You know, when we were in Yugoslavia, majority of the forests were public. And then with becoming the new country, the forests were given back to the previous owners. And this has resulted in a lot of forest owners. We have more than 300,000 forest owners in Slovenia. So the average forest property is very small. But on the other hand, you know, we have a really long tradition of sustainable management coming back from the beginning of the 20th century. Actually, the first forests were excluded from management for old growth forests in 1892 already. And I think because we are on the karst region, so I think it's like the nature, how the nature looks like in Slovenia, and this love for the nature is like really important for us. And a lot of owners and small properties, they add a complexity, but then the owners are usually very well aware of the importance of the forests. So
yeah, that's great to hear, and really interesting. Yeah. So please, if you have questions for Marjana, post them in the chat. And meanwhile, I would like to ask Bernhard if perhaps what do you think about the work done in Slovenia and their approach?
Yeah, I think Slovenia is a well-known example for this environmentally friendly forest management. So that's why you guys are always invited to give talks. It's always about Slovenia. For me, one interesting point, of course, is now given the disasters that you had in your country this year with the heavy floodings. So how would this affect your plannings? So is this an element that's already included in your planning, this risk management, or is this something that takes you a bit by surprise and now everything has to be adapted again?
Well, actually, I mean, we had quite a lot of this kind of disturbances lately, but it's to somewhat, there is risk management, but with every such big disaster, there comes sanation plans, which are added on top of the forest management plans. And then we manage those forests that were, degraded because of natural disturbances. It can be fire, bark beetles, the floodings, and they are managed according to the sanation plans, kind of. That's how we do it. But then we have, I mean, I'm a more like I'm a geneticist actually. And I think what we have in Slovenia, we rely really a lot on natural regeneration and have done so for the last 70, 80 years. And with that, we have maybe lost a little bit of the knowledge on how to regenerate with seeding and planting. And we are trying to get back that knowledge. Because when we have, I don't know, last year we had a fire with 3,000 hectares that burned down. It's really difficult to wait for the natural regeneration to come, especially when the owners and the public, they want the forest to get back as soon as possible and fulfill all the functions or the ecosystem services again. And here it's like this time perspective also that that we are struggling a little bit. So
I can imagine. So this is the second point, is of course the social perception or the public perception that a destroyed forest is always a failure. Well, it might be a large-scale disturbance, which is getting more and more likely. Okay, thanks. Are there any more questions? I think, Magda, how do we do it? So we ask questions now to the speakers because time is running, I guess, huh?
Yes, we have one question here in the chat, so I think we can do that now. And then we will go to Carlotta. So we have a question from Francisco. So he's saying, very interesting presentation. How do you control the implementation of these forest management plans? Who is in charge of this? Is it public authorities? I think you show a slide where it is said that these are NGOs.
No, it's not NGOs. So the Public Forest Service keeps track of the implementation of these plans, but then the actual works are done by forest owners, by the state forest, the entity for that manages the state forests, different contractors. So, but it's always the public service that keeps an eye that the plans are carried out as they should be. They, for example, have to stamp every tree that goes out of the forest. So yeah.
Yeah, great. We also have a remark from Tina. So maybe you can react on that in the chat.
Yeah, I can.
And yes, the time is running, but we will have some more space towards the end of the workshop where we can kind of have a discussion we will have a discussion with all of our speakers. So there will be more opportunities to ask questions. And now I would like to ask Carlotta.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be here and to have the chance to talk with so many specialists and professors about this topic. Of course, I'm Deputy Mayor for Sustainable Policies of the Municipality of Reggio Emilia. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, so I believe now you see it. Okay. So as I was saying, I'm Deputy Mayor for Sustainable Policies of the Municipality of Reggio Emilia. So I think we're gonna do a change of scale. So I'm gonna talk about what we're doing about urban forestation in our city. This is an overview of all the green spaces in Reggio Emilia. Reggio Emilia is a city of 170,000 inhabitants. And it's a very green city already. What you see here, it's an highlight of all the different parks. We have 192 parks divided by different categories: historical parks, urban parks, neighborhood parks, and natural spaces running along the city. So greenways and urban forests. And then we have, of course, the green public services, so all the green spaces that actually are serving specific services, like as you see here, sport, schools, hospitals, cemeteries. And then what we can find in streetscape, so whatever you find in the city, like boulevards and mitigation islands. I decided to try to focus on how we developed our forestation strategy, starting from another strategy, which was the adaptation strategy for climate change, because I think this was the base analysis that we used for any planning tool that we had developed in these years, from the urbanistic plan until the mobility plan that we just approved a few months ago, and of course the forestation plan. What you see here, it's an analysis that has been done together with the University of Venice, UAV University, which was made with the flight LIDAR, and that was exploring the vegetation, exploiting the response of chlorophyll activity, was investigating all the soil surfaces, so if it was permeable or impervious. We had sky view factor, the portion of sky which is visible from an observation point, solar exposure of all the surface of the land, heights and slopes, and flow direction and accumulation areas. So this is an overall map showing all the local vulnerabilities of our territory. So which means the predisposition of the territorial, economic, social, infrastructural, and physical fabric to suffer damage or losses as a result of events linked to climate change. Of course, thanks to this analysis, we focus on all those that we believe are going to be the risks in the next decade, which of course is heat waves in urban areas, which means problems for the health of citizens with critical summer ozone pollution and increased demand for electricity. You know, Reggio Emilia is in Pianura Padana, which is one of the most polluted area in Europe. So we do have a lot of issues also on air quality, summer drought and water shortage, which means increased drought and difficulty in supplying water for irrigation purposes and domestic consumption, and extreme rainfall events with hydrological risk, so which means an increased risk of urban flooding. Our region experienced a very big flood just a few months ago, so this is something we are dealing with every day. From this strategy, from this analysis, we got to the objectives. We have 6 general objectives that then were developed into 20 specific objectives, but I will focus on the general. which are, first of all, strongly increase the presence of vegetation in the city to create a dense network of urban and extra-urban greenery, to guarantee the multifunctionality of the infrastructure network for adaptation and mitigation, to increase the territorial fragmentation of the built fabric and with it the potential for development with prevention of impacts and increase in urban and peri-urban resilience, to converge territorial usability and development potential with the prevention of impacts and the increase of urban and peri-urban resilience, to protect citizens, of course, by ensuring their safety and health, and to guarantee an improvement in the management of water resources and efficiency of its infrastructure network. The map that you see here, it's the map that we did that came directly from the one you've seen before. And these are all the existing green areas where we actually would need to improve the presence of trees and of biodiversity, thanks to the analysis that will be done. So these are all the different green areas. These are more than 200. And these were all the areas where we plan to have an intervention thanks to the urban forestation plan. So I wanted to stress the point that we really thought that the forestation needed to be connected to the adaptation strategy, because we think that trees and planting new trees, having more biodiversity, working on with specific tools that I'm going to show after this slide are the base for the adaptation of our city. So we can say that our urban forestation plan is based on 3 different actions. The one is the plan as we developed it in the past years together with citizens and the investment of private companies. We invest 200,000 euros every year to create new urban forest together with the funding of private companies that will subscribe a contract for which they will need to maintain the areas for 3 years after the planting. The second line of project that we have is called Parks for Climate. We developed this thanks to another European project, which was a LIFE project based on the need of on the adaptation strategy. So a project that could enhance the adaptation of our territory. And the first 4 actions that we put in place were actions on 4 different parks of our city, and I'll show you some pictures right after this slide. So, and this was a specific project that was funded by the European Union with the LIFE project of 55,000 euro plus 50,000 euro put by the municipality plus 20,000 euro from a private company that was a part of the project. And then, of course, we have everything that is green spaces and streetscape in our city that need to be maintained, and for which we spend 2.5 million every year for parks and green areas. I wish it was the double, but it's something that we have to deal with the lack of other money. So I was saying we decided to.
Carlotta, please conclude.
Yeah. Okay. These are the main tools that we decided to use for our strategy, which you can see here. So experimental microforest with the Miyawaki method, which is a Japanese landscaper, country hedges, multified meadow, and rows of trees. These are some pictures of the action that we've been doing in these parks lately. And the monitoring that we are doing, collecting data directly from the different park and measuring temperature and humidity. These are some actions that we did to engage people on this project. Our region helped us in distributing free plants every year, and this year in November we distributed 4,000 plants for free to all citizens in our main square in the city center. And all these actions all together made us reaching this results from 2019 to today. We've been planting 17,400 trees, and we distributed more than 68,000 plants in our municipality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carlotta. Very interesting presentation. You're doing great work in bringing nature back to the city, and it's great to have this example that's maybe a little bit different from the other ones, looking into urban and peri-urban areas. I also think the analysis that you have presented and done is really impressive. So thank you for sharing that with us. Maybe a short, quick comment from Bernhard, and then we have some questions in the chat as well.
There's at least one that I can see. Yeah, a quick one, Carlotta. Thanks for this impressive presentation. I think maybe a point that is interesting for all of us, because there are, of course, now these huge activities of planting more trees and really in huge numbers. So what are the experiences in your city or in your region with the maintenance of such new plantings? Because the one thing is you can plant whatever you want, and then after 5 years, then if more half of the trees are dead, very often this is the case that it's so difficult to maintain these plantations or plantings. What is the experiences, and if it's successful, what's the secret behind?
No, that's true. Actually, we had we were lucky with we decided to start the project in an area where the need of water was very low, because we had a lot of water underground. So actually all the project that we did in that area, actually we had a very, very low percentage of loss of trees. And then the fact that we work with private company, that helps us, because they need to have the maintenance for 3 years. So they help us in doing this. Apart from the specific project, I think maintenance, it's a big deal. And it's something we are not culturally prepared to face. I don't know how to say it, but especially in our country, this is my vision. We are very focused on making new projects, but then we should also be able to maintain much in a better way. So this is something that we are trying to do, as I was saying, trying to put much more money and having much more people working on the project, so that they can be followed in a better way. Yeah, and I mean, these plantings are so visible, so you cannot hide them away if it fails. So, and then maybe the motivation will also go down if the maintenance is not secured. Yeah, a very important point. Yeah, as you said. Yeah. Good, Magda. I think there is one question.
There is one question from Katerina. So maybe, Carlotta, I will ask you for a very short answer, because we're in a slight time delay. So thank you for the great presentation. How much did the analysis with LIDAR cost for the whole city? And then another question, is it common for Italian cities of mid-size to have climate adaptation strategies, or is Reggio Emilia a pioneer?
Should I answer now?
You can, yes, you can answer now, but maybe keep it short. Yeah.
No, actually we got also funding from the region to develop the strategy. So it's something that we've been doing also thanks to the region. And I think more and more cities are now adopting this tool. But for us, it was a big challenge, and it was also thanks to the European LIFE projects.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so now the plan is to have a short break. Before the break, we would like to take the opportunity to invite you to participate in a word cloud in Slido. So you can open that through a link in the chat, and we will also share a QR code on the screen. For those interested, we will open a networking breakout room. So just let us know by writing in the chat if you would like to take this opportunity to interact with the other participants in this way, and we will move you to the breakout room. Otherwise, we will see you back at 15:15 for the second session on ecosystem services in forests, and our interesting keynote speeches from David Ellison and Marco Onida, sorry.
And now we go into our second session. So I'm really impressed with the excellent presentations that we had already from Carlotta, from Marjana, and from Bernhard. Very inspiring examples and ideas that we have here. And now in the second part, where we are talking a little bit more about ecosystem services of forests, we will have, I'm sure, an equally exciting presentation from David Ellison, who is going to tell us more about nature-based solutions. That is also something which many of you were pointing out at the beginning, a big interest in that. And so David is going to talk about precipitation recycling and cooling power of forests. So here we go. The word is yours, David. Please share your presentation and let's go ahead.
Great, thank you very much. I will try and share. Hopefully this goes smoothly. So my name is David Ellison. I work at the ETH here in Zurich, and I focus a lot on the positive benefits of forests, both for precipitation recycling, and also now I'm focusing on the cooling power of forests. And I would argue that these are probably the two most important components of potential forest use for nature-based solutions. I will start talking a little bit about the precipitation recycling phenomenon. For those of you who are not familiar with the idea, water from the ocean only contributes about 40,000 cubic kilometers of water, but on land we have over 113,000 cubic kilometers of rainfall. So the biggest question is, where does all that additional water come from if it doesn't come from the oceans? And the answer is that most of it comes from evapotranspiration from the land surface, primarily from tree and forest cover, but also from other vegetation types. And as soon as you realize that, then you have to ask yourself the question, well, what would happen if we lost all that tree and forest cover? What would happen to rainfall? Would we then only have 40,000 cubic kilometers of rainfall on land? What would that mean for things like agricultural production or for land surfaces on the temperatures on the land surface? And once you've thought of that, then you also have to think about the opposite question. What if we put back all of the historically lost tree and forest cover? What impact might that have on rainfall? Might it dramatically increase rainfall potential? What might that mean for agricultural production? But of course, that if you add tree and forest cover, there's land use competition. It might mean we can produce less agriculture. What might that mean for cooling or temperatures on the land surface? Once again, I'll come back to the cooling element in a moment, but I would like to insist that there are large and important benefits from increased wetland and forest cover, and these have primarily to do with the supply of water on the land surface, water availability in other locations. So more tree and forest cover is generally positive for rainfall, for water availability on the land surface, for the hydrological cycle across the land surface. However, at the same time, I would point out that we have to be very strategic about this, because just because you plant more trees and forest cover, it doesn't mean that the rain comes back in the same place, right? It usually falls down in some other location. So we need to think a lot about what are the wind and weather patterns in individual locations that drive these kinds of relationships. I don't want to say more about that at the moment. I would like to talk about the cooling aspect, which I think is more important because this is probably one of the more heavily debated points at the moment. There are essentially four causal pathways by which tree, forest, and vegetation cover affect temperatures on the land surface. One is carbon sequestration, the second is surface albedo effects. The third is latent heat production, or what we call evapotranspiration. And then there's the most neglected fact, which is the production of cloud cover. And it's interesting to note there are a lot of net effects models and studies out there that try to look at the combined effects on climate and temperatures of forest cover. But very often cloud production gets left out of this. It's hard to call these net effects models. And I would argue that largely albedo effects are overemphasized, and I will try to explain why I believe that is true in a moment. But I would also like to note that in the UNFCCC, most of the focus, of course, of the benefits of forest is on carbon. But of course, these benefits go much further. They have to do with water. They have to do with potential for cloud production, cooling of the land surface. So I'll talk a little bit about each of these in turn. With respect to carbon, it's very obvious that tree and forest cover draws carbon dioxide down from the atmosphere, reduces the concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But of course, these days we have more emissions than we have the ability to draw down carbon from the atmosphere. And that has the result that there is an increasing gap. And there are also increasing concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. However, at the same time, it's important to note that if we were to stop all deforestation currently happening on the planet and or restore all of the historically lost forest cover, we could reverse this process just with the forest cover. So that's the carbon side. Evapotranspiration is interesting for many reasons, but in particular, it helps to cool the land surface. Now, if you believe in the albedo phenomenon and the albedo arguments, they say that forests are dark colored surfaces. Therefore, if you plant more forest cover, it can warm the land surface, right? Except that when we look at thermographic images of the land surface, we actually find the opposite to be true. So if you have a lot of tree and forest cover in a well-watered environment, the temperatures tend to be significantly cooler. And it's actually the open areas on the land surface and even open areas with light colors that tend to be much hotter and to bring more heat. So actually what we find is that tree and forest cover cools the landscape. It helps to store water on the land surface. I'll come back to that in a minute. And so it's largely beneficial for cooling on the land surface. However, we still want to know, I will also add that we find the same phenomenon, of course, in urban settings, right? The more tree and forest cover, vegetation cover you have in the urban setting, the cooler that urban setting is likely to be. Now, tree and forest cover is incredibly important for storing water on the land surface. However, this goes against the dominant paradigm, which argues that the less forest cover you have on the left side of this diagram, the more infiltration and groundwater recharge you should have. But what we're finding these days is that this paradigm is now being updated. And the result of the change in this paradigm is that we recognize now that with very low tree and forest cover, we have almost no infiltration and groundwater recharge, and most of the water will run off as overland flow into rivers and oceans and doesn't really evapotranspire into the atmosphere, right? And in order to get infiltration and groundwater recharge, we need some minimum level of tree and forest cover. And there's actually an ideal point in the middle of this graph. You can see is the highest amount of groundwater recharge, infiltration and groundwater recharge in the middle. So with a certain amount of, I would argue, a minimum amount of tree and forest restoration, we can achieve this amount of infiltration and groundwater recharge. But if we want precipitation recycling, we also do need to go further. So the ideal density of tree and forest cover may actually be higher, right? So we can increase the ET regime evapotranspiration over the land surface with more forest cover. But at the same time, this may present problems with regard to local catchments because it reduces the availability of water in the local catchment, right? It puts it into the atmosphere and it goes somewhere else. But still, there's a question, right? So we say tree and forest cover is good for evapotranspiration, for storing water in the land surface, but does this really bring climate cooling? So I would argue that it cools the land surface, but it may not necessarily cool the climate, right? It goes into the atmosphere, creates clouds. But what actually happens is that evapotranspiration contributes in the long run to cloud formation. And the advantage of cloud formation is that it increases the reflectivity. Well, this is an albedo effect, the good albedo effect. It increases the reflectivity on the top of the cloud so that incoming shortwave solar radiation is radiated back to space. And what's really interesting is if you look at the global energy cycle without clouds, and what we notice without clouds is that we suddenly get a very large amount of surface warming. In fact, with the total clear sky budget for the globe is plus 20 watts per meter squared, which is a huge amount of energy. It's many times more than the current Earth energy imbalance, which is only 0.79 watts per meter squared. On the land surface, it's a smaller amount, right? This is what the land surface is, what we can impact with change in tree and forest cover. There it's only plus 5.8 watts per meter squared, but that's still a huge amount of energy compared to the Earth's energy imbalance. This, of course, suggests that deforestation brings significant warming and not cooling because it removes the potential for evapotranspiration on the land surface. It also removes the potential for water storage on the land surface, right? And then, of course, reduces the potential for cloud cover over the land surface. So the loss of cloud cover presumably matters a lot for temperatures over the land surface. Now, I've tried to estimate this in a paper that is unfortunately not yet published, but hopefully will be soon. It's under review, and I have a second revision coming up. And for the cloud cover, I estimate a change. So if we were to restore all of the Earth's historically lost forest cover, the change is potentially greater than the Earth's energy balance, is 0.79. It's that alone, just in terms of the potentially increased cloud cover, could solve the temperature problems, right? Keep in mind, these are back of the envelope calculations. I'm not using global modeling to do this. I'm trying to figure out what things might have been if we had that forest cover. But these are large numbers, right? And if you add together the carbon impact, then keep in mind, these are additive. They're complementary effects. They can improve the Earth's energy imbalance together, right? So these are actually very large phenomena. I myself was surprised at the size of these numbers when I generated them. I'm not trying to argue we shouldn't be focused on CO2. Obviously, CO2 is a huge problem, right? But tree and forest cover can actually potentially do a lot. So to come to a few conclusions, the recycling of water on the land surface is driven by tree and forest cover. The storage of water on the land surface is driven by tree and forest cover. The cooling of terrestrial surfaces, lower surface temperatures, is driven by tree and forest cover. And of course, more wetlands and forests can bring extensive global cooling, either through the reduction of CO2 from the atmosphere, this drawdown of carbon from the atmosphere, or by increasing evapotranspiration and thereby increasing cloud cover and thus the top of atmosphere reflectivity from clouds. So the benefits, I think, are quite extensive and shouldn't be ignored. And if I had my perfect world, I would add as much tree and forest cover as I possibly could. I would argue each tree is a carbon sink. Each tree is a cooling tower. Each tree is a source of future rainfall. That is, well, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, David, for this inspiring presentation. As you were saying, we need more clouds, as I understand it. That's good. Even if they're not directly maybe above our territory, but if everybody works on it, then we have more clouds everywhere. And we need to stop deforestation. I think that is one important message, and the other important one is we should try to restore as much forest as we possibly can. What kind of numbers are we talking about here? How much is that? I mean, I couldn't read your figures in your upcoming report, but what are we talking about here for Europe, for example?
So I haven't divided these numbers into numbers for Europe. These are global numbers. I'm not quite sure how to answer the question. I haven't tried to divide it up into geographic territories and impact territories, but you know, maybe here's one way of thinking about it. The temperate zone in the world is probably the most heavily deforested area in the world, right? Europe is just one example. The US is another example. China, Russia, all of these areas across the temperate zone have been heavily deforested historically. I think there's a lot of potential there on the land surface. Yes, we need agricultural production, but even with that, there is a lot of potential on the land surface. A lot of rewilding is going on in different territories. And in Switzerland, for example, where I live now, a lot of the mountainous areas is being rewilded because farmland has been abandoned. It's no longer economically reasonable to farm some of these areas. And more actually could if we could reduce the subsidies that keep the land free of trees. I mean, it's an interesting kind of dynamic.
No, it's a very important aspect, not to subsidize things which we actually don't want to have.
Yes, yes.
We get some questions, and please don't be shy, ask your questions. We have great experts here, so please post them. If we are not able to answer them in the workshop, we will answer them afterwards. In any case, we will always come back to you. So the first question is from Marjana. What is the optimal density of forest or tree cover in terms of numbers for temperate forest ecosystems? Are there any estimates?
I mean, there are a lot of calculations. I mean, part of the problem is that, you know, we have changed the nature of the catchments and watersheds in which we live. They are now heavily inhabited by people. We have industry. So we have other water use demands. And it's not always possible just to restore all of the historically lost tree and forest cover in these areas, because that would take away some water. So some balance has to be found. But at the same time, there are a lot of locations in the throughout Europe and throughout the world where there is heavy rainfall, lots of water availability, and where it would be possible to add additional tree and forest cover. And so I think we need to be able to focus on those areas. Just as an example, the dark blue and purple are areas where rainfall is very high. If we could increase the tree and forest cover in these regions, it wouldn't have much negative impact on the catchments, but it could have a very positive impact in terms of distributing water to other locations.
And thank you very much also for this visual. Maybe a last question with a request for a short answer, please. You mentioned some misconceptions in your presentation several times, talking about, you know, less trees would mean cooler surfaces, whilst actually the opposite is correct. And we get a lot of awareness raising requests also in the word cloud. So what do you think can be done to you know, get a better perception of what actually is the right way of approaching this?
Well, from my perspective, it's a lot of it is about publishing the papers that will support the idea and show the data and the information. So I'm hopefully I'm headed in the right direction in that regard. I think I've already done this with respect to precipitation recycling, and I think that's now been pretty much mainstreamed as an idea. There are still pockets of resistance, but that I think has changed dynamically, and so publishing is one, talking about it as much as possible is another, or present it to events like this obviously helps to get the word out. So I welcome every opportunity I can get to talk about these topics and try to.
We will take it up, no worries. I think there's a lot of interest, and we'll share as much as we possibly can. So a big thank you to you, David. And as I said, you're still here. You can still answer questions. So please don't be shy to send them to us. So big thank you for this presentation. And before going to Teresa, just a small poll again, because we would like to know, and on your side, to what extent your region or organization makes use of nature-based solutions as just being presented. So for example, forests or wetlands. So please let us know to what extent these nature-based solutions are already being used in your region. So I guess Carlotta is going to say completely.
Yeah. Not completely yet, but no, still not.
Well, I think we can see the trend. There is some extent, also some large extent. Nobody is completely happy yet, not even Carlotta, I think. And yeah, minimally is still also, you know, 22%, 20%, 1/5. So there is a lot of things we can still do, especially to some extent and minimally. Well, thank you very much for voting. And this brings us now to speak a little bit more about forests and water. We have an excellent example from Catalonia, which we are happy to hear now from Teresa, which will make a presentation to us about how they have been tackling that.
Hi, hello everybody. I'm trying to share the presentation.
It works.
It's perfect.
Thank you. Okay, so my name is Teresa Baiges and I work for the Forestry Department of the region of Catalonia, which is located in northeast Spain, as you see here in the map. And I'm going to present this the work we did within the Horizon 2020 Sincere project on developing a local payment for ecosystem service scheme in relation to water and forest. And this work we did was selected in the Progress Interreg Europe as a good practice to share. Just to see whether it works. Let me see. Okay, I just wanted to start with the same graph. This is the graph that David has just presented. So thank you, David, for that. Because I think that it's good to start by saying that it's important when we work with ecosystem services, the scale in which we assess this ecosystem service, and also the priority that this territory where you are going to implement the practice is. No? So there are different priorities in different areas. And in our case, our scale was very local at watershed level, and our priority service was groundwater recharge. Now we are now facing a drought, the worst drought ever. We are in restriction also for water, for drinking water. So this for the last 5 years, it's been a priority for us. So we are in this position here. So we are here in this situation, lots of forest with lots of trees, and what we like to see is here to have this other situation where we are at the maximum groundwater recharge in some areas where this is needed. So just for a context, the challenges we are facing in Catalonia with the relation to forest and water. The first idea is that our forest cover has increased a lot in the last century, from the 10% at the beginning of the last century to 45% of tree covered area, 60% if we count bush area covered by bushes. So forestry area is 60%. And this has been done mainly by natural regeneration on abandoned farmland. It's a complete success restoration story for in our case, but unintended anyway. But this has led to this challenge that we have now lots of forest biomass. It's been increasing and increasing because these forests are not managed, because they are used to be farmland. Now these forest owners have no tradition of managing this forest, and it's not profitable. So forest biomass is increasing. And this is being connected to a reduction in water quantities in our river flows, this is the number for the last 25 years, a reduction in 80%. There are also other causes, other reasons for that, but increase of cover phase and biomass is one of them. But it also, this high increase in forest land and in biomass, it poses another threat to us. It's the high vulnerability to fires and other risks that risk to lose forest cover and soil and the landscape in our areas. And this is also as consequences on water quality and floods regulation and cultural services. So what we are advocating for is to manage these forests that are currently unmanaged under a multifunctional forest management paradigm, which means nothing but the regulation of the tree density and the tree biomass. So to find a balance, less trees, but also enough trees to continue having the benefits, but less trees than the ones that we have now. So to increase forest resistance and resilience to disturbances. And we did that in an area. So we focus in the area, in the watershed surrounding water reservoir. We did it. We chose this area basically because it was easier for us to communicate afterwards the idea of forest and water. So we chose a reservoir. But now, for instance, we are focusing in other areas such as municipalities that are not connected to the public network of water, that rely on their own sources, where these kind of nature-based solutions can have more impact. The second thing to do was to build consensus on the link between forestry and water. I'm sure that some of you are still thinking, what's she talking about, removing trees, to have more water? And this has been the question for the last years. Are you sure about that? Well, this is what science tells us, and that this is what we are trying to do. But there should be to start a consensus on this link between forestry and water. And this is also impeded by something that was mentioned in the first presentation of we work in silos, foresters in one silo, water agency in another. So we put together all these agents, and once we reach this consensus, we try to integrate them into regulations and legislation that was being produced at that same time. And in our case, we chose a local regulation, which was the urbanistic master plan of the reservoir, but also a regional regulation, which is the Water Framework Directive River Basin Management Plan of Catalonia, that was being revised at the same time. And for the first time, it included measures related to forestry management to increase the water availability. Third thing we did was to outline the expected changes we wanted to see in our forest. In one case was this, so to reduce the number of trees, and this meant to triple the annual rate of hectares that were being managed in that area, and giving priority to strategic areas for fire prevention. But also we did some planting in areas that were already affected by a wildfire. So we wanted to enhance the resilience in that, and also the filtration effect of the forest for water quality. So we did some planting. We introduced biodiversity criteria. We don't see any other way forward with integrative forest management, including biodiversity, but also social criteria. The fourth aspect I want to highlight is that you need to find the evidence that what you are planning to do has an impact on the services you are looking for. And so we did this, and this requires lots of research, and we could do it because we were in this Horizon 2020 project. So we did, and we had this kind of numbers, like if we manage these 10,000 hectares at the same time in this type of thinnings, we could have these amounts of blue water additionally in the reservoir. We also tested it, the impact of this management on the probability of having a wildfire, so the darker areas, or the areas that change the burning probability after forest management to a lower vulnerability. But and this was particularly for that area, but we also produced, now we could produce a methodology that links directly basal area, which is how many trees do we have, with annual water exported to the river. So this is some equations that we have for the whole region, and everybody can use them because we did already all the research. And finally, the last point was, once that everything, so that we acknowledge the link, we know the impact, we know what we want, then we designed this payment for ecosystem services, and it's based in joint management of the landscape. We believe in the collaborative management of forests. So we help the creation of a local forest owner association in this area around the reservoir. And they are the ones implementing the measures, the ones providing the service on water, and then there are some beneficiaries of this service which are the ones who are financing this. This was, we wanted to try this. Of course, the government can directly implement some practices. Of course, we have grants.
Please conclude, yes?
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's the last one. We have grants, but we wanted to design this type of scheme, so to be able to include also private money into forest management. So that was all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Teresa, for presenting your approach, which also seems very interesting. So I'm really looking forward to getting some feedback from David on that, who's our discussant here, because we seem to have heard some contrary opinions now, but you know, you also brought in the fire management, you know, the risk of wildfires. So David, what is your opinion about the approach that was chosen in Catalonia?
So I think we are actually in complete agreement on this topic. That there was this one slide that Teresa showed that was the repeat of my slide, right? And I also said that when you get to the higher end of ET production with more forest cover, you're taking more water away from the catchment. And that is a potential problem in some locations. And then if you add on top of that the impacts of climate change, which are to raise temperatures and increase evapotranspiration as a result, obviously some locations, in particular ones that are closer to areas that have lower levels of rainfall in the first place, are losing more rainfall. And so the climate is having a big impact on how tree and forest cover interacts with the atmosphere, right? And this is a big problem, and the big question is, do we treat it with thinning? So that's partly the response here. To some extent, more forest management of the area, or do we try and treat it, for example, with more forest cover in other locations where there's more rainfall available and might bring then more rainfall to the locations that are under stress, right? And I think the answers are not easy, especially in the more southern regions that are much more hard hit by rising temperatures and declining rainfall. That is a huge problem. And I sympathize with and understand, I think, very much the problems that Teresa and the people there are facing.
But you see how much great work is being done, how you have been combining also the research, and you bring this all into your work, and you have this pilot that you're testing, now you're rolling it out to the region, if I understand it well. So what can I say? Well done. Thank you very much for sharing this. Teresa, we have a question from you from Gerhard Wolf. Teresa, how do you explain the gap in water availability between managed forest and natural ones?
I'm not sure whether I understand which gap in water availability that's Gerhard refers to.
Okay, then in this case, I would propose that you have a little exchange on the chat, or maybe later, and we can also ask this question to you later, and then you can answer it separately from the workshop, because we still need you here in the workshop now. So, well, thank you very much for this example. And we have another forest nation. Somebody mentioned it's always Slovenia. I think for me it would always be Finland when it's about forests. So here we go. We have Matti Virkkunen, who is also speaking to us about this regional forest program. and I'm not pronouncing your company. You have to do this yourself. Please introduce it to us, and we're looking forward to hearing from you, Matti.
Thank you very much, Astrid. I will try to share my screen. Like this, and then. Do you see my presentation now?
All perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone, and greetings from the icy cold Finland. And thank you for this invitation to share you this good practice regional forest program. And this has been selected as a good practice in a project called NACAO, nature-based carbon offsets. So to put you on the map, in the recent years, the new geopolitics in Finland has had an enormous effect on the operation environment here. For example, the demand for wood, for domestic wood in Finland has increased to the war we have in Europe, and so the intensity of forestry has increased in Finland. And because of this, also the regional forest programs have become more relevant and more needed, and just to give guidelines for sustainable forest management and forest habitat management. And what I mean is that more has to be made from less material with less impact to environment, and to meet all the opinions for all forest related stakeholders. And my company, Metsäkeskus, that's how it's pronounced. It's the Finnish Forest Center. Our role is to enforce forest legislation. We finance private forestry. Then we collect forest data. That is through laser scanning, aerial imaging, field plot measuring, data interpretation, and data processing. And we share this data to everybody interested about Finnish forests. And we advise and we educate forest owners, forest professionals, and about forest management, use, and protection. And we also promote forest-related livelihoods, their diversity and profitability. And we are funded by Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry of Finland. And why good practices, and why do we need 14 of these? So we are a country of long distances, and we are over 1,000 kilometers long, and we have even longer border with Russia. And you can imagine that things that work in for example in the south of the country do not work in tundra in the northernmost Finland. And also, like with most of the population concentrated in the south, the questions in very undensely populated northern are different than in the south. And but however, the economic importance of the forest is very great. So over 65,000 people are employed directly into forestry, and 20% of our exported goods come from forest industry products. And we have 600,000 private forest owners, and that's 1 out of 10 of us. And we are very target oriented. We have very high expectations about our forestry, and we are seldom anonymous, even within a region. But the regional forest programs are our best tool to make a common decisions and to practice forestry as well as possible. And the regional forest programs are monitored by regional forest councils. And the regional forest programs emphasize sustainability as the foundation of forestry. And the forest councils support the implementation of regional forest programs to the members' diverse expertise, representing the forest sector, public administration, non-governmental organizations, and other forest stakeholders. The focus is on the overall sustainability and the use of forest, economic, social, environmental, cultural sustainability, and to for the growing business of all forest utilizing actors. And the Regional Forest Council monitors the implementation of the regional forest programs. And the key objectives are that the forest should be managed in a versatile, sustainable, and pluralistic way, with growing benefits in all use. And the profitability, valuation, and operation conditions of sustainable forests should improve. And sustainable forest use is part of also our climate solution. And to be more concrete, here are the objectives of the regional forest program in central Finland, in the region where I'm active. And to put you on the map, it's 20,000 square kilometers, the area. And so that's like 2/3 of Belgium. And our annual yield is 8.3 million cubic meters, and the annual cut is 6.5 million cubic meters. So we're talking about significant area and also a significant yield and annual cut. So it means also it has big economic impacts. So the objectives are growing and vigorous forests, increased biodiversity and water protection, climate sustainable forests, infra supporting versatile use of forests, research and development in wood-based products, and nature-based possibilities from forests. And for all of these, we have actions through which we implement the plan. And here I have some policy changes that we have recently been able to achieve. For example, we have been able to be active in water protection measures. And also we have been active in the management of peatland forests. We have been able to diversify the forest management activities there. For example, we do less clear cutting on the peatland forest, and this is very important for also the groundwater level management. But then if we need to present some challenges, they are maybe on the outskirts of forestry exactly. So for example, forest road network, it's a crucial link between forest and the industry, but sometimes it's challenging to get enough attention and enough funding, enough attention for the road network management, and especially for a regional forest program. For some reason, this seems to be a great challenge to get enough attention and activities around this. Another thing that has been found to be challenging is wood-based construction, and this often comes to the fact that we need to emphasize economic factors in the public procurement. And unfortunately, currently the wood-based solutions are not always like they cannot compete in economic terms when we compare them to for example, concrete construction products.
Matti, please conclude.
Yeah. Okay, so some goals and impacts we've had. So we put in 4 man-months annually, and in total we run now a project portfolio of 3 million euros. And okay, that was wrong. So and about some indicators that we have. So all of these actions are measured. So we measure, for example, the area of first thinnings. We manage the area of continuous cover forestry. We monitor elk densities. We monitor the areas of forest fertilization, and also key indicators are like funding for private forest conservation, volume of dead wood in the forest, that is an important indicator, and also the quality of water conservation actions in soil scarification in in our regeneration areas. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Matti, also for mentioning what you're monitoring. I think it's always very important that you see you're monitoring tree coverage and so on. Other countries will maybe not monitor elk coverage, but okay, here we go. So maybe we have time for a short question from David on your presentation.
It's harder to have questions for Finland because Finland has so many trees. It's actually a great example. You know, Sweden is also another great example in that regard. I mean, the current forest cover in Finland, Matti, maybe you can tell me, is how much?
Current forest coverage. I don't actually remember exactly.
Somewhere around 70%.
Yeah, 77 rings my mind, but I could be wrong also, but around that.
Yeah. So I mean, in most cases, I'm always interested in where are the opportunities for additional forest cover, but it doesn't sound like that's really so much a question, or is it a question at all in Finland? Are there opportunities for additional forest cover? Do you think that would be a good thing?
It could be a good thing. We have some land abandoned from agriculture where we could do that, but on the other hand, also we have had enormous areas of drained peatlands. So we want to restore some of that area. So that would mean less trees on those areas, because we want to cut the trees and we want to block the ditches and we want to soil to keep the water and to bring them to the state where they were like originally. So it's not just afforestation, it's restoring those habitats.
Wetland restoration in particular. Yeah, I think that's a great point. Yeah, great.
Thank you very much, Matti. Also, the peatlands spring to mind exactly. Very important task that you have to fulfill there, and even for you, still a challenge, like many other countries like Ireland and so on, which are trying to work on that. So, but thank you very much for this example from the Nakao project. It's one of the new projects of Interreg Europe. So we're really happy to have you on board. And just to mention that a new call is going to come out on the 20th and 21st of March next year from Interreg Europe. So we look forward to seeing more projects on forest management, for example, or other nature-based solutions. So good opportunities here to do some capacity building in this area, which we have all concluded is so important. And secondly, if you already have now specific questions, you can always come back to us directly and ask, for example, for a peer review, which is a tailor-made event of 2 days where we are bringing some experts to you to cover your specific challenges. Like, for example, we have a challenge in peatland restoration. You could always ask us and we can see if we can bring some experts to you. Well, thank you very much for that. I would ask all 6 speakers to turn on their cameras again so that we can come to some conclusions. I'd like to ask first our participants of session 1 if they could give us some short feedback on the main lessons learned, I think, from this workshop. We'd like to start with Bernhard, maybe. I cannot see you, but there's too many people in the workshop. Are you there, Bernhard? Otherwise, I would...
yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you very well. Yeah.
Yeah, I told you in advance, then I'm now in the car, so I keep my camera off so you don't see me shouting at other people angrily. Okay. No, it's still calm here. Should I give a short summary from my perspective?
Yeah, just very briefly, like what your main lessons learned are, very briefly.
Yeah, I think my first hypothesis that there is no one size fits all. I think it was confirmed in these discussions. I think we had different approaches towards how sustainable forest management could look like in the end, but with a common goal. And the common goal is also not carved in stone. So it's not that we should manage our forest how we used to do, but how we shall do it and how forest shall look like. So I think the example of planting and the example of restoration is also something that we really have to look how they can be maintained in the future and not do something very traditional, or because we really have to be very responsive now to the challenges that we have ahead. And I think the second lesson, of course, that is just coming alongside with changing environment and changing expectations towards forests is the interaction with a broader audience, a broader public, which means, I think it was mentioned not only by me, that we have to break out of our silos, that we have to invest into communication so that people don't only react on headlines, but also in a broader understanding about the issues around forestry and how we can sort it out together, and how we can bring more than one interest onto the table and see how to moderate this. I think these are, in particular also for you guys working on a very regional level, the most important things, because they are not abstract, they are hands-on, and hands-on doesn't only mean planting trees or tending trees. It also means tending your audience, tending your public, and tending your stakeholders. So in a sentence or two, my summary.
Thank you very much for your words. I think you've already provided a very nice summary, but I'm also looking forward to just hear what Marjana and maybe also Carlotta then next. What are their 1-2 key lessons that they're taking away? Maybe we starting with Marjana.
Yeah, I don't know if I can add anything more to Bernhard, what he said, because I think he captured the main points. For me, it was that the situations across Europe are different and not one solution fits all. I think also it's really important to raise the awareness, especially among different groups of stakeholders, because that's something that we have seen. The ideas of what needs to be done can differ between the foresters. Let's say there are some that are hardcore forests, some are very interested in nature conservation. Then there is a public, especially around urban centers, that have a totally different expectations from forests. And I think the dialogue is really important on local levels, regional levels, and also on the European level to see what we want from our forests. And yeah, and it's not one solution for everything. So
Thank you very much. Maybe Carlotta, you would like to add something?
I think I've lost the question, if there was a question specific on the topic, but
no, it was like 1 or 2 key takeaways from this before we go to our keynote speaker.
Okay. No, I was impressed by the level and the scientific approach of all the intervention and the presentation that we've seen today. So I think from my point of view, being a local administrator, that we really need the support of science and who is working on these topics every day with a scientific approach to develop policies that then have real impact on sustainability in our environment. So I'm thankful for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. And Teresa?
Yeah, I'd like to strengthen what Bernhard said about of course we are many different situations in Europe, and that's why of course we need a European level legislation, but it should provide enough flexibilities for bottom-up initiatives to be able to develop in the locally adapted and community-led in every specific context, but also when we talk about ecosystem services in the world, it says because the beneficiaries are society and other have to involve them. And so yes or yes, we say, so there's no other way. And this is, somebody said it, it's not the forestry sector anymore. We have to be open. And also the role of projects of Interreg and Horizon 2020 life projects, which are the ones that provide this room for cooperation and for innovation to be developed.
Thank you so much. That is an important point also to be made. that the ecosystem services are for society, and we have to involve society and not stay in our silos, as many have pointed out before as well. So maybe very briefly over again to Matti and then to David. If we have lost Matti, then I would give the word directly to David.
Great. I guess I'm really excited to hear all this discussion about forest cover and sort of positive examples of forest management. I also find it very encouraging to hear that there's a lot of attention also to the urban settings. I think maybe one thing that was missing here is, well, I'm always looking for more opportunities to plant more trees. Where can I put them? And I wonder about the agricultural sector in particular. So this is 46% of the land surface in the European Union is used for agriculture. And yet the common agricultural policy, in particular through the direct payment system, has essentially discouraged having trees in the landscape in the agricultural communities. For a long time, I think it's still the case, you couldn't have more than 60 trees per hectare because that would make you ineligible for direct payments. And at the time that such a policy was introduced, it may have made sense, avoid corruption and so on. But in today's context with climate change, it is absolutely nonsensical, right? Why can't we have an agricultural sector that is tree friendly instead of the opposite of that? So I think we need to think very carefully and long about opportunities for more tree and forest cover. Where can we really alter the landscape and improve things like precipitation, recycling, cooling power of trees, and so on. And I think there are massive opportunities if we really give it a try. So I'll stop there.
Also for our biodiversity. Well, thank you very much. I think there's a lot of input, not only for our local and regional administrations, which are here, the scientific and academia, but also for the European Commission to hear what's already going on and where the challenges are lying in the region. So we are really glad to have Marco Onida here from the European Commission, who is going to give us a keynote speech on what is happening at Commission level and what can we expect in the next months and years to come to do more for boosting our forest ecosystems. So, Marco, the word is yours. You are still muted.
Sorry, I was still muted.
No problem.
Yes. Thank you very much, Astrid, for the kind words, and thank you very much for the invitation. I will try to give you, in a few minutes, an overview of exactly as you just said. I have a lot of slides, but I will fly through them at light speed and just stop on some that are more relevant. Let me just see if this works now. Are you seeing it?
You see the presentation. We hope we have it in presentation mode in a second.
I see. Yeah, you see the presentation.
Now presentation mode.
Yep. Okay. So do you see it?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So very trying to gain time. I like very much the intervention by Bernhard this morning. It was very balanced as usual, and about sustainable forest management. I would like to start with one fact that European forests are not necessarily in good shape. European forests, if you see from this graph here, we have a large share of European forests which are just monocultures. 1/3 is one species, and half is 2 to 3 species. The large majority of forest management is even-age forest. Why is that? Because this was traditionally the way, because forests were considered basically a source for timber. It's the forest multifunctionality and the relevance of forests for environment and climate has arisen in more recent times. So since you cannot change the way forests are done and managed overnight, because the life cycle of forests is very long, we are confronted with the situation that it's nobody's fault. It was these forests were mostly planted after World War II, but today these forests are very vulnerable. They are suffering because they are, in many cases, monocultures. They are not necessarily resilient. So we have a big problem of biodiversity in Europe. So, for instance, this is a typical landscape in the boreal region, where you see the clear cuts and even the soil. This is all carbon lost, because 70% of the carbon is in the soil, and when you do clear cuts, carbon is lost. So there are a lot of things that we have to improve for the future. The forest strategy for 2030 comes from that angle. It says, okay, we have an issue. We don't just have to look at the deforestation outside Europe. We have to look at the way we manage our forests in Europe, and brings in a number of objectives to have a better, stronger forest for our future, and also bigger forest, and proposes an agenda with several actions. Some of them have already been delivered, and I will illustrate them to you. This is just a summary. We will distribute the slide, so we will have, this looks complicated, but it's just a summary that shows you basically the forest strategy and its origin and rationale, which is the biodiversity strategy and the EU Green Deal. But in the forest strategy, there are main deliverables is the monitoring that I will quickly mention later, the new forest governance, just to work a bit on to build on the words of Bernhard, to have also the forestry sector come up of his side. Guidelines for biodiversity. I will present them, 4 guidelines which have been already published, plus some work that is still due for the future, in particular work on better defining what sustainable forest management means, because sustainable forest management remains a relatively vague concept that is difficult to see, as Bernhard was saying, whether it is complied with or not, because the criteria and indicators are relatively vague. By the way, it was interesting, the slide with the 44% of people thinking that there is a sustainable forest management strategy. It's not a lot, 15 saying no and 41 saying don't know. So that is also quite telling. The EU forest strategy is not just a conservation strategy. It's a strategy which has a dimension of bioeconomy, which is basically promoting the use of timber in a more sustainable way, in particular developing longer lived products compared to short-lived products, ensuring sustainable bioenergy, and then also very important, promoting other types of revenues than not just timber revenues, but the revenues from other ecosystem services, which are very, very important, particularly in the Mediterranean region. And then there is issue that we have today with forests being very intensively exploited in Europe with these monocultures and so on, and we need to have a rethinking for the future. So in this strand of ensuring forest restoration and for sustainable forest management, in particular for climate adaptation and forest resilience, in this strand we have the guidelines that I would like to present to you a little bit more in detail now. There are 4 guidelines which have been published this year on biodiversity-friendly afforestation, afforestation and tree planting, on closer to nature forest management, on defining, mapping, and strictly protecting the few remaining primary and old-growth forests, and then on public and private payment schemes for forest ecosystem services. I will not say much on that because Teresa has already very well illustrated the concept, and this scene series is one of the best examples we have. Just briefly, this guidelines on biodiversity-friendly afforestation, reforestation, and tree planting looks at has 4 chapters and looks at 3 types of ecosystem: forests, so new forests that we can create; urban areas, so that's, for instance, very relevant for the speech that we had from Reggio Emilia; and agricultural land, that is the agroforestry. We have several cases, for instance, in forest, because you might need to reforest after harvesting or after disturbance, or you might need to increase and improve the biodiversity in your forest, or you might need to convert areas that are not forests, but you want to create new forests. And on all these areas, there are a number of recommendations. Now we don't have time technically to go into all different, but just want to fly over quite fast. And of course, you can just look at the guidelines before afforestation and deforestation. Make sure that you choose the right area, evaluate the biodiversity. There are areas where you might not need to have forest because it's better to keep it, like grassland or peatland or wetland. Choose the right species. This is very important in relation to climate change. We promote the use of native species and natural regeneration, but you might need to have sometimes towards species which are locally adapted, although they are not necessarily native for reasons of climate change, and make sure that we also have the material, genetic material from the nurseries. This is just an example, but also during afforestation and reforestation, these are examples of the recommendation to make sure that you protect the habitats, to avoid the heavy machinery. So these are all recommendations that are basically very similar to what we have also in the guidelines on closer to nature forestry that I will present just in a moment. And also what is important is also the aftercare, take care of forests after the forestation and reforestation, because aftercare is as important as the planting. For the urban areas, also same type of recommendation, but of course adapted to the different ecosystem that we have in urban areas, and also encouraging to use a number of spaces that today are neglected in cities. It's not just parks, but you have a lot of possibilities to plant trees and to promote biodiversity in urban areas that are kind of not considered, but they are actually very, very important. And we have a few examples in Europe already of cities that are going green in that sense. Finally, the third type of ecosystem is the agroforestry, and we just list here the type of agroforestry practice that can be where you can have combination of trees and agriculture, and is very beneficial also in many cases for biodiversity. On closer to nature forest management, it fits in the same approach. Basically, the idea is to have a forest management that mimics nature. So instead of having big intervention, clear cuts, monocultures, we go for a type of forest management that is more compatible with the natural dynamics. For instance, to have more structural complexity, more diverse forests. By the way, diverse forests are an insurance policy, because the more a forest is biodiverse, the less it will suffer from external disturbances. So if you have a disturbance and the forest is not biodiverse, it's much more likely to suffer than if you have a more biodiverse forest. And then, as I was saying before, promoting natural forest dynamics, structural complexity, reduce investment costs, because you can consider the long term. But at the same time, the interventions are lighter, not heavy intervention, no heavy clear cuts, not clear cuts at all, actually. No use of heavy machine, use of natural regeneration. And this, I really invite you to look at the guidelines themselves, because they are basically very, very illustrative. Another guideline that was adopted is the one on the definition and protection of old growth forests, which are very important because there are very few remaining, less than 3% in Europe, and in some countries they are also in danger. So we have to act now to make sure that these old growth forests and primary forests are identified and then are strictly protected. Finally, the guidelines on public and private schemes or ecosystem services, I mentioned it already. This is a guideline where you can see a number of hints and recommendations on where the funding can come from and examples of use. Again, I will not say much because Teresa was very illustrative, and we have seen very, very good cases in Catalonia. Very briefly, coming to the end, in the biodiversity strategy, we have a political pledge for planting 3 billion additional trees by 2030. On the basis of principles of additionality, ecological principles, and care after the planting. That is a very important political, nice European project, actually, that unites also citizens that are reporting the planting, because we have a counter, you can see it here, a counter at European level, which is at the moment still very low, but where trees are reported by organizations, by local authorities, by citizens, and I would encourage Reggio Emilia to report their trees here, because that would be very, very, very welcome. Finally, just to conclude, as Bernhard has announced before, we have a new framework for forest monitoring. This is a proposed regulation. So this is the guidelines are all non-binding. These are all communications. In the case of monitoring, we have proposed a regulation of the Parliament and the Council, which has been adopted by the Commission on the 22nd of November, that will be a kind of a hub for monitoring for many, many different pieces of policies, legislation, and interests that rotate around the interest of forests. Forest is relevant for many respects that you can see here, and this is just the list of indicators that today we miss, because in many cases they are already subject to monitoring, but in a very diverse way between member states, or in a way that is not sufficiently consistent. And then we want to have a consistent set of forest data or indicators by using both the remote sensing technologies, which is the first role, the ground observation, which is the second one, and a combination of the two, which is the third one. And you can see all these type of indicators that would be very important to know where we are with our forest in order to then act where we need to ensure their resilience for the future. As I said, not just for protection, but resilience also in order to have a healthy forest means also security of timber provision. This governance was mentioned by Bernhard. I will just briefly say that there is a proposed decision also to amend the dialogue between the Commission and the Member States in order to make sure that we talk to all relevant stakeholders and experts of Member States when we talk about forests, and not just with those that traditionally have been involved, but we need to have involved the environment, the climate, the civil protection, the forestry, the bioeconomy. They all have to be around at the same table. And with that, I will just go back to this slide here, just to say that. Here we go. Sorry, too fast. Yeah, basically you see in a nutshell all what I at very, very high light speed now I said, so I apologize if this was maybe a bit superficial, but the idea was to give you an overview of all what's going on, and we can very, very well provide information if this is necessary on the specific deliverables, as I said, the guidelines, the monitoring, the 3 billion trees, the governance. Plus, there are, and I close with that, there are initiatives which are expected for the future. One is sustainable forest management thresholds and ranges to better define what sustainable forest management means today, because we have a definition which is still pretty general, in particular when it comes to biodiversity, and we need to make sure what that means. And also on the closer to nature forestry, we have the guidelines, but it is planned to have a kind of certification system in the future. We don't yet know how this will look like, but something that will reward those who go close to nature, and they can basically have a kind of logo award that it can be recognized by the market, and that it's also linked to the payment for ecosystem service, because the idea is that if you go closer to nature, you do a service to the community, so you deserve also being rewarded financially, and certification is very important in that respect. So with that, I think I've taken a bit more time than expected, so I will stop here and I'm available for questions. Thank you very much. Back to you, Astrid.
Well, thank you very much, Marco, for this rapid overview, but there's a lot of things are going on. There's a lot of work that you're currently carrying out with regard to forests, as we can see still on the slide very well. Especially interesting the forest monitoring law, which just came out, and we have heard from Carlotta how important it is to do an analysis, start from the analysis, know your data, so that you then can implement the right measures and make the right policy decisions. What I find particularly interesting as well, that you have made all these guidelines from which people and the regions and local authorities can benefit, and we have shared them in the chat. So if you would like to see them, they will be there, and also in our follow-up article where we will share all the presentations, and we will share also all the interesting links and ideas that came here. I don't see any specific questions now to Marco. As always, if you still have a question later, you can always come back to us. We will always answer these questions. With this, I think I can say a big thank you to all our speakers today. That was a really interesting overview from the scientific point of view, from the implementation point of view. At the very beginning, we heard from Bernhard, there is like still an implementation gap. So it's really good to hear that many of you are already working on it, and many of you want to work on better forest ecosystems. And we hope we've made a contribution by inspiring you to go in forest management, sustainable forest management, and to see good practices. So with this, a big thank you to our speakers. Thanks to the ladies, Teresa, Carlotta, Marjana, to Marco, to David, to Matti, who was unfortunately run away, and I hope I have not forgotten anybody, to Bernhard, of course. And so thank you very much. And please be so kind to fill in the survey about this event. If you liked it, or if you have any suggestions for us how we can improve it, you will find again the link in the chat. And those people that have been asking for a little help desk, which is one of the possibilities that you can have afterwards, please stay on board, and we will directly connect with you. So a big thank you also to my colleagues, to Magda, who has been moderating the first part, and also to Lotte for making sure that we have everything in place for the technology and all the information in the chat. So thank you very much, and hope to see you soon on one of our Interreg Europe Policy Learning Platform events, and see you next time. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you, Astrid, too.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.